Bonjour, Kitamagi and Nene Ireland Indigenous, and welcome to this episode of Social Studies Explored. Today's episode, the ratification of the Constitution. So let's begin with Oakland County's Mesa materials to briefly run over the ratification of the Constitution. This is something that we've read about in the Michigan Open Book, but I wanted to make sure that you are very clear on. There's also a video included via the internet, and we'll show you that in just a few minutes. So when we went to ratify the Constitution, we still had a debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. As you recall from yesterday, Federalists were in favor of a strong central government, while the Anti-Federalists were opposed to that strong central government, both with a myriad of reasons and fears that arise from the era of monarchy in our nation. But now when we're ratifying the Constitution, we really have to get down and figure the big issues out, such as the power of the national government, the state power, and that right there is, in the nutshell, the issue between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. We also are looking at the power of the executive branch and the need for a Bill of Rights. There is a struggle between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists over its ratification or approval of the Constitution. Federalists favored the Constitution. They wanted to limit state power and believed in a strong executive branch. Anti-Federalists believed the Articles of Confederation just needed to be changed. They did not favor the Constitution. They were not in support of a strong national government. Anti-Federalists also worried the Constitution did not do enough to protect individual rights. And as a compromise, a promise was made to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. This helped get it ratified. And these arguments are still in place today. You can look at one side is progressive and the other is the conservative side today. Remember, ratify means to approve, like you vote on it. Federalists supported the Constitution and a strong national government. Anti-Federalists did not. And the Bill of Rights, as you remember from the Bill of Rights, are the first 10 amendments or additions to the Constitution. Steps to ratify the Constitution, and this document is amongst your papers, and you should at least take time to read it. I will read it aloud as well, but you will need it to complete the assignment. When the delegates at the Constitutional Convention had completed their work, they sent the new Constitution to Congress. Congress was at first angry that the delegates had exceeded their authority. They were only supposed to revise the articles. Instead, the delegates had written a new plan for the national government. In the end, Congress decided to put forward the new plan of government to the people. The new Constitution did not give Congress authority to accept the new form of government on behalf of the people. Rather, the Constitution had arranged that each state would call together a convention of people elected for the purpose of approving or disapproving a new form of government. Thus, the people's will would be done. Under the new Constitution, 9 states had to ratify the Constitution for it to go into effect. Generally, the line is 3/4, right around 3/4 of the states. Ratification was not simple. Able and educated men used newspapers, pamphlets, and public meetings to debate whether the Constitution should be approved. Those who opposed the new Constitution were known as Anti-Federalists. They had several reasons for opposing the Constitution. Some believed the delegates in Philadelphia did not have the power to write a new Constitution. They believed it was illegal to create the new document. Some Anti-Federalists were concerned that the delegates represented only the rich and believed the new Constitution was written for their benefit. Another objection was that the Constitution gave too much power to the central government at the expense of the states. They believed a representative government could not work in a country this large. Anti-Federalists also feared that the Constitution gave too much power to the executive branch of government. They feared that the president could end up like a king. The most serious criticism was that the Constitutional Convention had failed to adopt a Bill of Rights. Anti-Federalists opposed the adoption of the new Constitution. They included people like George Mason, New York Governor George Clinton, Patrick Henry, and James Monroe. The Federalists favored ratification. They fought back against the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists believed that the rejection of the Constitution would lead to chaos. They believed a strong national government was needed to preserve liberties and ensure that the new country could function properly. They favored limiting state power and felt that the Senate, with 2 senators per state, would adequately represent state interests. They also believed in a strong executive. The Federalists felt that the Constitution gave the other two branches ways to check the use of power by the executive branch. Federalists included Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Initially, the Federalists believed that a Bill of Rights would be a problem. They argued that a list of rights might not be complete. They also said that the national government was so limited by the Constitution that it posed no threat to the rights of citizens. Eventually, James Madison agreed that a Bill of Rights was needed. In the end, the Federalists guaranteed the people that the first step of the new government would be to adopt a Bill of Rights. Approval of 9 states was needed to adopt the new Constitution. It took 10 months to get approval from that number. And later on, you'll be writing information on what the Federalists believed and the Anti-Federalists believed. But let's go ahead and show this little video clip. It's a performance by another teacher. I do not own the rights to this video, but it was found here by a Bing search, similar to a Google search. But it does kind of highlight in an adequate way the argument. So hopefully now after this, you'll have a good idea of the debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists when it came to ratifying our Constitution.
Today we're going to discuss the ratification of the Constitution. Ratification is a fancy way of saying the passage of the Constitution or the approval of the Constitution. So we've talked about how America declared independence. We've talked about the Constitutional Convention, the process that went into writing the Constitution, some of the great debates that took place, some of the constant debates on what the system should look like. Now we've got the system. Now we've got the Constitution. But that doesn't mean it becomes law. That doesn't mean it becomes approved. So the next step is to talk about how do we convince people to approve the Constitution of the United States. So our goal for today, to compare and contrast the goals and rationale of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So if we're talking about ratification, as you may note, there are basically 3 things that we need to consider. Is the new Constitution going to maintain our Republican form of government? We talked about this a little bit. Key to the United States was a different form of government. Is this Constitution going to hold up the status quo? Will we still have a Republican government? Would the federal government have too much power? Again, we've got this debate over whether the power should lie in the national government or whether the power should lie with the states. And finally, there's the question over a Bill of Rights. There's a big debate over whether or not we need a Bill of Rights, and we'll discuss that more when we talk about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So, on the one side, we've got the Federalists. The Federalists are people who want the Constitution to pass exactly as it is written. They are the people who don't like the Articles of Confederation. They think the Articles of Confederation don't give enough power to the national government. So what they want to do is create a national government that's got more power. They want to create a strong national government. So they believe by passing the Constitution as it's written would do exactly that. The Federalists, again, they wanted the Constitution exactly as it's written without a Bill of Rights. In order to try to convince people of this, they wrote what were known as the Federalist Papers. Today, when you buy the Federalist Papers, you can buy a giant book and it's got all of them combined, but really what they were at the time, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay would write newspaper articles. The debate that used to take place back in the day was in the newspapers. And so they would write these 2, 3, 5, 15-page newspaper articles convincing people, try to convince people that the Constitution was worthwhile and that the Constitution needed to be passed. Today, again, we put these together in one giant collection. It's a really big book known as the Federalist Papers, but at the time, just understand it was an ongoing debate that lasted months throughout local newspapers across the United States. On the other side, of course, there are the Anti-Federalists, and they too came up with their own set of papers to try to convince people to oppose the ratification of the Constitution. Now, unlike the Federalists, who were all kind of on the same page that they wanted a strong central government, The Anti-Federalists have a lot of different opposition to the Constitution. They're not a very unified group. Some people don't like the Constitution for one reason, some people don't like it for another. At the end of the day, they all don't like it, but for different reasons. So one of the reasons, and one of the major reasons, is these were the people who believed in states' rights. They thought that the national government would have too much power. They thought that that didn't work very well with the king. The last thing they wanted to do was go back to that sort of system. They were also worried that the Constitution didn't include a Bill of Rights. They thought that the Constitution needed to list out the rights of the people because, well, that was the whole reason why the American Revolution was fought. So these people, the Anti-Federalists, want a Bill of Rights. Now the counter, if you want to hear the Federalist argument, the Federalists say we don't need a Bill of Rights. They say if you try to list out every single right, it would become long, it would become cumbersome, it is just not possible to list everything out. It would become confusing to the people. And if you did list everything out, their next main concern would be, well, what if you forgot something? Would that imply that those rights aren't protected? Or would those rights be protected? And so the Federalists said, oh, we just shouldn't even talk about it, period. We know what everybody's rights are. We know what should be protected. Let's not even discuss this. Of course, that didn't sit well with the Anti-Federalists. Some of the Anti-Federalists, again, believed in states' rights. They thought that the United States government really wasn't meant to be a big, strong national government. They thought the United States government should function more at the state level, that smaller communities were a better way to control the government. And many people today might argue the same thing. They also argued that under the Constitution, the executive branch, the president essentially, was given too much power, and there wasn't enough separation of powers and checks and balances in the Constitution the way it was written. They also had an opposition to an army during peacetime. They said, well, what do we need an army for if we're not actually at war, if we're not going to war? And so that was another major issue. So what we're going to do next, I want you to identify whether you think the following quotes were said by a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist. So quote number 1, I do not conceive we can exist long as a nation without having a power which will pervade the whole Union. Was that A, Federalist, or B, an Anti-Federalist? 2, the state declarations of rights are not repealed by this Constitution, and being in force are sufficient. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. 3, the laws of the general government being paramount to the laws and constitutions of the several states, the Declaration of Rights in the separate states are no security. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. The vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. 5. State legislatures have no security for the powers now presumed to remain with them or the people for their rights. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. 6. There is no declaration of any kind for preserving the liberty of the press, the trial by jury in civil causes, nor against the danger of standing armies of peacetime. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. 7. Repeated violations of these attachment barriers have been committed by overbearing majorities in every state. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. 8. A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should rescue or rest on interference. A, Federalist, B, Anti-Federalist. All right, well, now that we've done that,
At this point, if you're watching asynchronously, you should use the Google Classroom to complete your assignment. If you're in the physical classroom, we will be doing it together momentarily. Minwa, Bamapi.